Welcome back, everyone. I'm Rachel.
And I'm Joe.
And we're here with Paul A. Young. So we shelled our moulds in the last video. So we're now going to make a water ganache that we're going to shell our moulds with.
We are. So water ganache. This is a very, very simple ganache, and it's a ganache that hasn't got a long shelf life, so 2 weeks maximum,
Right.
or make them today, eat them tomorrow, especially if you've got an event. And something I love to do with Valrhona chocolate is not distort the character of its character within the beans used, within the chocolate. And adding dairy to dark chocolate means you do lose some of the delicate nuances and complexities of the chocolate. It's like adding milk to coffee and tea. Some of the tannins get dampened, and some of the tannins are good. We tend to think tannins are bad because we always cover them up with milk and sugar. But actually, sometimes they're really important and some of the most important parts of the aftertaste in chocolate. So this is just water. I'm using unrefined light muscovado sugar. That is just a choice of mine. You could use any sugar you like.
Okay.
Coconut sugar, brown sugar, white sugar, golden castor sugar, whatever you like.
So it's just personal preference on the sugar.
This is personal preference. I like the slight caramelly note in the sugar. And I brought it to the boil. Make sure you do boil it well. That kills bacteria on the saucepan, because your chocolates are only as clean as your equipment. And I've got my Manjari. Luckily, thank you, Valrhona, it comes in these little bean shapes, which means easy to weigh out, and they melt very evenly when you make your ganache. So I'm going to turn the hob off because that has been boiling for about a minute.
Right.
That kills lots of bacteria. And I'm going to pour half of it directly onto the chocolate, onto the couverture. You can see it looks quite brown, but that's the light muscovado sugar. And then shake the bowl and just allow the chocolate to take on some of the heat. Never pour it on here vigorously boiling. You can
Right.
really scorch the chocolate. You know, chocolate likes to be warmed gently and cooled gently. But just let that warm through.
And you've only put half the
I
amount
put half
there.
on for now, yeah. It helps with the emulsification, putting half on. Whisk goes in, and I do not want to generate air. I just want this to be mixed around to melt the chocolate within the water so it becomes glossy. If you pour all of the water on in one go, you can find that you can't get it to emulsify. But if you do that by accident, just get a hand blender,
Right.
an immersion blender, pop it in to your ganache, and it will come back together. Do not be tempted to go onto the internet and start Googling what to do if my ganache splits. And I'll tell you why. You can if it's Keylink, but nobody else. There are so many unusual things I've seen, like add a tablespoon of boiling water, add a touch of butter, add a bit more of chocolate. You don't want to change your recipe. It literally is a process thing normally and usually. Valrhona chocolate has sunflower lecithin in it, a natural emulsifier. That aids the emulsification, the blending of the fat and the water, you know, the cocoa butter within the chocolate and the water, so it shouldn't split. However, if you're using double cream onto white chocolate and milk chocolate, that's when you can get it to split because there's a lot of fat. So stir around. I mean, this is super basic, but sometimes the most complex flavoured recipes and the most joyous recipes are straightforward. So I will pop that back down and just show you how glossy that is.
Yeah.
Super glossy. And right now, if I let that set, it's half the amount of water. It'll be very, 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 very thick ganache. But I want a silky, smooth ganache. So I'm going to add the rest of my water. Just in a couple of additions.
So I presume the same would apply for, say, milk chocolate. So you can do the exact same process for a different type of chocolate. It doesn't just apply to dark.
The only thing with water ganache is it is allergen-free, as long as there's no soya lecithin. Soya is a allergen. But with this, it's naturally vegan, naturally dairy-free. If you make a water ganache with milk chocolate, it's not a water ganache because there's milk in the chocolate. The whole water thing is any liquid other than dairy. Now, this opens up a huge amount of scope for recipes. Imagine with milk and cream, you're making a ganache and then you're pretty much flavouring it with something. But imagine if what I'd made here was coffee, and I poured coffee onto here. Immediately you get a coffee ganache, but I wouldn't be pairing it with Manjari. I'd probably be pairing it with Mackay, a Valrhona chocolate that has more stronger notes, that I think, like a stronger coffee note to it. It could be red wine for a red wine truffle. It could be mulled wine for a mulled wine truffle. It could be beer. ale. Like tea, making a very strong Earl Grey tea, pour it onto the chocolate you've paired it with. So for Earl Grey tea, I always go to Carib, the 66%, because it's got that lovely tea flavour to it, and it's not too bitter, doesn't overpower the tea. Jasmine tea. I mean, if you just add up all the things, orange juice, pineapple juice, pomegranate juice.
Options are endless.
But that's where one recipe can make a lot of things without adding other flavours. So it will become a coffee truffle or ganache, not a coffee flavoured ganache.
Yeah.
So I remove the word flavoured when it's actually made with the actual thing, rather than saying, right, I'm going to make a cream-based ganache and I'm going to put drops of bergamot oil in, which is Earl Grey, but there's no tea in it. And I've seen that, and that's okay. But for me, I'm a purist. I do like to use the ingredients in it. Last bit of water going in. So I've done that in 3 additions. It doesn't need to be 3, but I like to do it like that, gradually. And you can see this ganache looks incredibly thin.
Yeah.
It is water,
Very
it's not
fluid.
cream, there's no butter. And now all we do is check that it is emulsified. You can use a spoon or a spatula. I just look at it on the back and make sure that there's no separation of fat and chocolate. It's a beautiful, silky, smooth, beautifully coloured ganache as well.
Lovely and shiny.
Now we need to let it cool, because putting it in the shell right now would melt the shell. Once it's cool, we'll pipe it in and then allow that to set across the top before we cap it off.
And what's the ideal temperature that you'd want to get it to?
The ideal temperature for me is always by touch.
Right.
So I just feel it on my wrist, and it needs to feel at body temperature. Not warm and not cold. Cold will be too thick to pipe. And you can make the ganache in advance, put it in an airtight container, keep it in the fridge for a couple of days, warm it through gently and fill it. So if you're looking to do one day of make all your shells, then do your ganaches, you can do this the day before and then use your ganache the next day. But remember, it is short shelf life. I haven't used anything to preserve it other than the sugar in there. So once it's finished, it's a 2-week shelf life within that chocolate shell.
And if you wanted to extend the shelf life on it, what would you use?
Everyone has their own version of what they would use. Some people like to whip in a little bit of butter, glucose syrup, sorbitol, and there are other industrial preservatives out there. Go with whatever you feel comfortable with. Sometimes it's a small amount of ABV, high ABV alcohol, or even just a little bit of citric acid. But with acids, they can change the flavour slightly, but you need a very small amount to stop any oxidisation or any mould growth within the chocolate.
I suppose the main takeaway then is don't be afraid to work with a water ganache, because obviously a lot of the time chocolatiers are taught that water is the enemy of chocolate.
Yep.
But
Now,
don't be afraid.
you are right though. So if I take my vat of chocolate here, just chocolate, so not ganache, and I accidentally got a drop of that water into there and mixed it, it would seize up, as we know,
Yeah.
or steam would. But because we're diluting the couverture with a larger amount of water, it dilutes rather than seizes, and we're pouring it onto solid chocolate, not melted chocolate. So don't be afraid of it and play with it. Now, if you look in your fridge today and you say you have half a bunch of basil left and a lemon, you could water and sugar in the pan, the zest of the lemon, chop up the basil, pop it in, bring it to the simmer and let it infuse, strain that onto your chocolate, and you have a lemon and basil ganache. Naturally, without flavourings, without adding anything else to it. But with things like soft herbs, basil lasts a very short period of time in the chocolate. So 7 days maximum. After that, the basil just disappears. That's where some natural essential oil of basil added in as well keeps the natural
just
flavour of the
extends
basil
the
up.
flavour.
Yeah, that's because I'm used to making lots of short shelf life chocolates. My whole business was built around make, buy, eat, buy more. Because they taste great, they've got a short shelf life. You have to keep coming back.
Yeah.
So if I'd made a fresh mint truffle, I'd use fresh mint leaves. But you're going to have to eat it in 2 weeks. After that, the mint naturally just disappears. Or adds a little bit of peppermint oil to keep the peppermint flavour up.
And how long would that extend it to, do you think?
Oh, indefinitely.
Oh,
the
okay.
longer. I mean, the shelf life, depending on the shelf life of the chocolate, but when you're using pure essential oil, they are literally stable. You could put it into the ganache and it will stay. It's just when you use a natural leaf, the essential oil is much more diluted and it will just naturally compound, those flavour compounds just disperse and disappear.
Right.
So we need to let this cool down and then we'll fill our shell.
Super.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.